test by Theodore L. Robert Proctor was a good driver for so young a man. The turnpike curved gently ahead of him, lightly traveled on this cool morning in May. He felt relaxed and alert. It was a good day for driving. He glanced quickly at the slim, gray-haired woman sitting in the front seat with him. She watched the trees and the fields slip by on her side of the pike. Robert immediately looked back at the road. He said, "Enjoying it, Mom?" "Yes, Robert." Her voice was as cool as the morning. "It is very pleasant to sit here. I was thinking of the driving I did for you when you were little. I wonder if you enjoyed it as much as I enjoy this." He smiled, embarrassed. "Sure I did." She reached over and patted him gently on the arm, and then turned back to the scenery. He listened to the smooth purr of the engine, and he was pleased with the sound. He had tuned that engine himself over the objections of the mechanic. You needed a special feel to do good work on engines, and Robert knew he had it. No one in the world had a feel like his for the tune of an engine. Up ahead, he saw a great truck spouting a geyser of smoke as it sped along the turnpike. Behind the truck, but not passing it, was a long blue convertible, content to drive in the wake of the truck. Robert was slowly catching up to them, but he would not reach them for another minute or two. When he was right upon them, Robert pulled nearly next to the blue convertible and began to pass it. Without warning, the blue convertible suddenly swung out from behind the truck and struck Robert's car. Robert's car was knocked to the shoulder on the left side of the turnpike lane. Robert was a good driver, too wise to slam on the brakes. He fought the steering wheel to hold the car on a straight path, but the car was tugged to the opposite lanes. Those lanes carried cars heading the opposite way. He held it. Then the wheel struck a rock buried in the soft dirt, and the left front tire blew out. The car slowed, and it was then that his mother began to scream. Robert fought against the steering wheel to straighten the car, but the drag of the blown tire was too much. The scream rang steadily in his ears, and even as he strained at the wheel, one part of his mind wondered coolly how a scream could so long be sustained without a breath. An oncoming car struck his radiator from the side and spun him viciously full into the left-hand lanes. With his left hand, Robert turned the wheel to the left and tried to stop the spin and careen out of the lanes of oncoming traffic. During one of the spins, he twisted the wheel straight and the car wobbingly stopped spinning and headed down the lane. Before Robert could turn it off the pike to safety, a car loomed ahead of him, bearing down on him. There was a man at the wheel of that other car, unable to move, eyes filled with fright. Alongside the man was a girl, her head against the back of the seat, soft curls framing a lovely face, her eyes closed in easy sleep. It was not the fear in the man that reached into Robert. It was a trusting helplessness in the face of the sleeping girl. The two cars sped closer to each other, and Robert could not change the direction of his car. The driver of the other car remained frozen at the wheel. He heard no crash when the two cars collided, head-on, at a high rate of speed. He felt something push into his stomach, and the world began to go gray. Just before he lost consciousness, he heard the scream stop, and he knew then that he had been hearing a single short-lived scream that had only seemed to drag on and on. There came a painless wrench, and then darkness. Robert seemed to be at the bottom of a deep black well. There was a spot of faint light in the far distance, and he could hear the rumble of a distant voice. He tried to pull himself toward the light and the sound, but the effort was too great. He lay still and gathered himself and tried again. The light grew brighter, and the voice louder. He tried harder again and drew closer. Then he opened his eyes full and looked at the man sitting in front of him. "You all right, son?" asked the man. He wore a blue uniform, and his round, beefy face was familiar. Robert tentatively moved his head and discovered he was seated in a reclining chair, unharmed. He looked around the room, and he remembered. The man in the uniform saw the growing intelligence in his eyes, and he said, "No harm done, son. You just took the last part of your driver's test." Robert focused his eyes on the man. Though he saw the man clearly, he seemed to see the faint face of the sleeping girl in front of him. The uniformed man continued to speak. "We put you through an accident under hypnosis. Do it to everybody these days before they can get their driver's licenses. Makes better drivers of them, more careful drivers the rest of their lives. Remember it now? Coming in here and all?" Robert nodded, thinking of the sleeping girl. She never would have awakened. She would have passed right from a sweet temporary sleep into a dark, heavy sleep of death, nothing in between. His mother would have been bad enough. After all, she was pretty old. The uniformed man was still speaking. "So you're all set now. You pay me the $10 fee and sign the application, and we'll have your license in the mail in a day or two. He did not look up. Robert placed a $10 bill on the table in front of him, glanced over the application, and signed it. He looked up to find two white uniformed men standing on each side of him, and he frowned in annoyance. He started to speak, but the uniformed man spoke first. "Sorry, son, you failed. You're sick. You need treatment." The two men lifted Robert to his feet, and he said, "Take your hands off me. What is this?" The uniformed man said, "Nobody should want to drive a car after going through what you just went through. It should take months before you can even think of driving again, but you are ready right now. Killing people doesn't bother you. We don't let your kind run around loose in society anymore. But don't you worry now, son. They'll take good care of you, and they'll fix you up." He nodded to the two men, and they began to march Robert out. Robert said, "You can't really mean this. I'm still dreaming, aren't I? This is still part of the test, isn't it?" The uniformed man said, "How do any of us know?" They dragged Robert Proctor out the door, knees stiff, feet dragging, his rubber heels sliding along the two grooves in the worn into the floor.